us today. We greatly appreciate your time. We will be recording today's session, and we will be muting you as you enter. We do have a lot of people waiting in the lobby, so I want to make sure that we get everybody in the call before we start. So if you'll give us a minute to make sure everyone is here and situated, I greatly appreciate it. All right. Awesome. Well, thank you all for joining us today. We have an awesome team of panelists, and this is a really important topic, and I'm really looking forward to hearing their perspectives. But I do have some housekeeping to go over first. Due to the number of participants today, we've automatically muted your phones to eliminate interferences. Please enter any questions or comments into the chat box. We really encourage questions, and I will say that we will be ending promptly at noon. So if you have any questions, please ask them early because we really want to make sure that we get to them. So please go ahead and share your questions in the chat box. If you are calling just through phone, you're also able to email questions to professional@asce.org. Please close all your applications, especially email, so that your system will run smoothly. And please keep all conversations geared towards the benefit of the community and today's topic. So we will begin today's roundtables with introductions from our panelists. Then each panelist will share their perspectives and insights on the topic of engineering a culture of inclusion in the face of injustice. So with that said, thanks again to our panelists for joining us today on a very short notice. I want to start off with Quincy Alexander. Quincy, can you go ahead and introduce yourself?
Yes, my name is Quincy Alexander. I'm a research civil engineer at the Army Engineer Research and Development Center in Vicksburg, Mississippi. I'm the past chair of ASCE's Committee on Diversity and Inclusion, and currently a member of our Mosaic Council. Thank you for allowing me to participate in this roundtable today.
Awesome, thank you for joining us. Next, I'll go ahead and turn to Andrea. Andrea, can you go ahead and introduce yourself?
Hi, everyone. My name is Andrea Casalboni. I am co-founder of FEDI. It's a design build practice in Italy. And I'm also a studio design manager for Berries. I design and build boutique fitness facilities all around the world. Thank you so much for having me today. I also wanted to point out that I served as scholarship chair with the Los Angeles Younger Member Forum with the ASCE last year in 2018-2019. And I'm also planning on joining the board again for the upcoming year. Thank you so much for having me today.
Awesome, thank you for joining us. Next, I'll go ahead and turn to Yvette. Yvette, can you go ahead and introduce yourself?
Hi, I'm Yvette Pearson. I'm an associate dean in the School of Engineering at Rice University in Houston, Texas. I am chair of Mosaic, which is Members of Society Advancing an Inclusive Culture, which is ASCE's board level advisory council that was instituted this fiscal year for the very first time. And I also host a podcast called Engineering Change, which is focused on diversity, equity, and inclusion and actionable strategies towards change in higher education.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for joining us. Bobby, I'll go ahead and turn to you. Can you go ahead and introduce yourself?
Yes, thank you very much. I am Bobby Shields. I'm a Regional 4 governor, twice retired, and now I run a small forensic engineering company. And I mostly work with insurance companies and lawyers. I'll make a few additional comments now in reference to the topic we're dealing with. George Floyd's statement when he said, "I can't breathe," is one that has been said on several occasions in the face of injustice. I actually wear a smart watch which monitors my blood pressure, and sometimes when I just think about race relations and injustice in America, my smart watch advises me to pause and take a deep breath for at least 1 minute. I've also noticed, especially in this time of COVID-19, that I actually hold my breath when crowded by unknown, unmasked person. So because social distancing allows me to breathe freely. Staying away from discussions about racism and race relationship keeps my blood pressure down. When you all asked me to participate in this discussion, my watch advised me to politely decline the invitation to be a panelist. But here I am, and I look forward to a frank discussion among friends.
Absolutely. Thank you for joining us, Bobby. Um, to start off with our first question, all of our panelists have been in leadership roles in their communities and ASCE. What advice would you give to an engineer that wants to start taking on more of a leadership role to encourage the positive change that is needed during these times?
Okay.
Um, I'm going to go ahead and make sure that everyone's muted. How does that sound? Does that sound better for everyone? All right, awesome. So I'll go ahead and direct that question first to Quincy. Quincy, can you go ahead and talk about, what engineers can do to create positive change?
This meeting is being recorded and or transcribed.
Yeah. So, I mean, when you ask the question about advice that we can give engineers that want to take on more of that leadership role to encourage change, I guess my first thought is that everyone has to realize that they are a leader whether they have a formal position or not. And so they have ability to lead things at their level. And so, if change is going to happen, it has to happen at every level of the organization. So rather than just focusing on what they would do when they get into a leadership role, I would suggest that looking at what you can do at the level where you are. So, as an ASE member, whether you're in a student chapter or the professional level, when you're looking at your branch section institute and you look around and don't see a lot of diversity and don't see a lot of support for diverse activities, then it could be as simple as, looking at what kind of inclusive activities could you create or could you bring in that would create a more inviting culture for various dimensions of diversity. Looking at, okay, if your branch is providing more support to the PWIs than they are to the minority serving schools, then, just pointing that out. So there are a lot of things that you could do at each level and versus waiting until you get into a position of leadership to try to affect change.
Absolutely. Andrea, what advice would you give?
Yeah, Quincy explained it beautifully, and I wanted to add also that in my personal experience, educating myself and others was crucial. We may not know everything. We may not be at the top of our game in terms of inclusion and belonging and really expressing anti-racism at the core. We may not know those things, and systemic racism could be really really spread. For me, it's more it's really important to educate and learn. The learning curve here is probably very steep, and the only thing to do is learn and educate, as well as speak up. When a young engineer like me sees the opportunity to cover a role of leadership against racism and towards inclusion, please do speak up. Please do educate you and others. And I also want to encourage all the younger member forums in ASE to form those committees, to establish those chairs that may not be active yet, but would be empowering for many others. And I want to bring up Los Angeles Younger Member Forum has been at work day and night to establish a new chair for the new year. It's going to be the inclusion, belonging, and diversity chair. So I encourage every other chapter to do the same and and be empowered by that.
That's great. Yvette, I'll go ahead and turn to you. What would you say?
Thank you. And I agree with Quincy and Andrea both. And I'll speak from a leadership standpoint. One thing that I often talk about, and Bobby mentioned this earlier, we for so long have avoided addressing the issue that it's something that is, I'm happy, and it's an unfortunate, very unfortunate and tragic situation that has brought this to the forefront. But I'm happy that we are finally having the conversations. And one of the things that I've always share as I'm talking about this is the first thing we have to do is look in the mirror. If you're a leader of an organization, whether it's a company, whether it's a department, an institution of higher education, a group within ASCE or ASCE at the society level, the first step to being to leading change is looking in the mirror and being willing to accept what you see there and say, and not accept it in terms of being comfortable with it, but being able to acknowledge that there's a problem here. And to be able to say, okay, I recognize that this is a problem, and it goes beyond just, one isolated or anecdotal occurrence or story that I've heard here and there, but there are some things that are baked into our systems and our organizations that have perpetuated the inequities that we see. And so the next step is then deciding that I am going to actively do something about it. As Andrea said, a large part of that is educating yourself. So this is not the time to go to the Black person you know, or the Black person on your team because they've somehow gotten in there because of tokenism, and oftentimes having our qualifications and what we bring to the table overlooked. So not to say we're not qualified, but some folks think they let us have a seat at the table because we're the good Black, and okay, we're okay because we're not like those others. And so we got to get folks out of that mindset. And so, and don't go to the Black person on your team or the other underrepresented person of color to say, okay, here, fix this. It's being able to step back as a leader and say, here, if you bring in someone with the expertise you have. There are researchers all over this country, all over the world with deep-rooted experience and expertise in racism and anti-racism. Bring in the experts and say, teach me. And then there are consultants that you can, if you don't know what to do, there are consultants who can guide you in that process. And the other thing is to recognize that it's definitely there's not a quick fix solution, although there are some things that are probably more immediately actionable than others. And those things go into looking at how our policies and practices have caused the disparities and inequities that we see. So if we see, for instance, and I'll give you an example. I was talking to someone after a speech that I gave, and he came to me afterwards and said, and he was a faculty member. So he said, well, my university requires us to have at least one woman or at least one person of color in our final pool of candidates that we bring to campus for faculty interviews. And his question for me was, how do I justify moving someone who was 15th or 16th on our list to where they're third or fourth and can come to campus for an interview? My response to him was, you are asking the wrong question. If every minority, every woman is ending up 15th and 16th on every search list that you have, you have a much bigger problem. You should be asking, why is every minority ending up at the bottom of the list? And that's the problem you need to go after. And so my encouragement to leadership is be willing to take that look no matter how much it hurts. If you want to effect change, it's going to take that very tough first step, which is taking a look and then bringing the people on board. Whether if you don't have the expertise on team, bring in the expertise you need. Do not put this on the backs of the people who are experiencing the inequities and the marginalizations. And I say that because we too frequently see that people of color and women, and I'll say especially the intersectional identities of women of color, we are too often shackled and burdened with the service work that's not getting us the promotions, that's not getting us the pay and everything, while our peers are going off to get these wonderful technical assignments. We're stuck doing the diversity work and we're not able to advance in our careers. And so that's why that's not the place for it. Bring in the people with the expertise you need. Sometimes you might find a consultant who is a person of color with expertise. That's great, but don't further disadvantage employees by doing it. And I want to reiterate something that Chris said, and that is, I think as leaders, the best predictors of what we will do is what we have done. So I encourage our students, I encourage our younger members, get involved. You don't have to wait to have a title. What can you do where you are to do even what you might think is something small could turn out to be something huge. But you start the work now, and then you grow and you'll start to see the opportunities open up, and hopefully we'll see a lot more inclusive leaders in the future.
Is there any more coffee?
I'm going to go ahead and mute all just to make sure that we are okay at this point. Finiaski, can you go ahead and share some of your advice for what people can do to impact positive change?
Thank you, Tirsa. And I was not able to introduce myself at the beginning, and I just wanted to take a couple minutes. I'm Fernioski Peñamora. I'm a professor at Columbia University, but I'm also in the board of direction. I'm a director at large at ASCE, and I'm the incoming chair of the Industry Leaders Council at ASCE. I also have roles as Dean of Columbia Engineering in Columbia University, as an associate provost in the University of Illinois, Urbana-Champaign, and also as a commissioner for the Department of Design and Construction in New York City. And I think this question is so relevant in terms of leadership and the advice that you will give. I always see that you can exercise leadership in any role that you have, even as an entry-level engineer, by your actions and by how you support the larger objectives of the organization and the society. So my most important advice that I give everyone is to listen, and particularly to listen when there is no sound. And because you really have to be connected to what work you are doing and how that work impacts others. And that's where the part of the listening is, like kind of listening how any action that you make may affect others. And these actions may not be something that you plan to do. It's not something that you are thinking. It is how you look at others and how that may affect them. And so, for example, I just give you kind of a little anecdote. In meetings, you hear that somebody that looks very different than the rest of everybody in the meeting, they make a comment or they make a suggestion, and nobody else pick up on that suggestion. Nobody even acknowledge that suggestion. However, then somebody else just paraphrase that same suggestion, and everybody jumps on it and kind of follows. And I think this is something that we all have to be supporting. And you don't have to be only the individual that looks like that person whose voice have not been heard. You can be what is, as Jared, as Valerie Jarrett said, the amplification. If somebody said a comment, acknowledge that comment, amplify that comment, bring it up to the forefront so that you are able to really listen what people are thinking and be able to spread it. When we're talking about the work that we are doing, really try to understand how that design in which you are participating may affect the end user, and who will be the end user, who will be that individual that will be affected, and how you can ensure that that individual will be feeling welcoming, will feel respected, will feel supported. And those are the issues. So I go back to the issue of listening, and you can exercise leadership at every single role, every minute of your day, both in your professional life as your personal life. And of course, when you start looking at the amplification, when you get involved in community activities in society, like ASCE, you can help to amplify those sentiments because you already have been trained to listen. So you can listen the whisper, you can listen the no sound, and use your position if you are from a group that has been privileged. You can use your privilege to ensure that others listen as well. Not only you, but others listen. So that will be my advice to anybody that is looking to really have a positive change.
Absolutely. Bobby, what are some of your thoughts? Bobby, I think you're on mute. Oh, we still can't hear you. Can you, it looks like you're on, can you hit the unmute button? You're doing it, it's not working.
Bobby, maybe try calling in separately over the phone.
Tirsa, you as the host, can you unmute him?
I can't, unfortunately. It's a security setting because they don't want someone to be able to unmute, because I could be snooping in on your conversation.
I understand.
Bobby, it looks like you're not muted now.
Looks frozen.
He looks frozen. All right. Bobby, hopefully you can rejoin us if you leave and come back. We do have some questions in the chat, so I'll go ahead and turn to those, and hopefully Bobby can go ahead and join us again. It's hard in the virtual environment. We want to try to be as flexible as possible with different bandwidths and areas. So the first question I'll ask is, race has always been seen as a political issue or topic. How can we as members, specifically younger members, bring up these tough conversations in the office to educate and hopefully evolve to educate our culture at work and in the industry? And Yvette, I know you had shared some thoughts in your introduction about that. Do you want to speak to that question?
Yes, and I was actually looking at the next question too. But so one thing is we are very aware that there are power differentials that make younger members in particular maybe a little bit uncomfortable in maybe challenging some of the things they see, or being able to I guess express freely their ideas or their experiences or those sorts of things. And so I'll take a step back before you get into an organization. Really take some time to look into that organization's culture and make sure it's a place where you will be received in terms of your ideas and suggestions. And Quincy probably can speak to this a bit more, but one of the things that I think is helpful is when you identify someone who is if you feel like, okay, I think I might have, I think I'm in a place where I don't necessarily have that ability to do that. You might identify whether it's a mentor or someone who's more senior in the organization to say, I have this idea, and maybe they can be the ones to help you roll it out. The hope is that they will also give you credit for it, so that then the next time you have something, you'll be more well received. But it's in an organization where the climate and the culture is very inclusive and very open to new ideas and open to change. It's a great place to be able to go to. Your leaders or whomever will listen and say, this is something that I think we need to address. Here are some resources for doing so. And I think that's one key as well. I always like to tell people, don't just raise problems and concerns. And if you can bring possible solutions and possible strategies to the table. So if there are resources that are good for helping teams to educate, be able to bring those to the table. But if you're, like I said, if you're in an organization where you feel that the power structure is not conducive to that, then definitely find somebody who can be what Dr. Adams calls your big dog, who can kind of step foot in and bring those things to attention of the appropriate people for you.
Absolutely. Andrea, I know this question also pertains specifically to younger members. Do you want to kind of give a younger member perspective?
Yes, absolutely. So Yvette just explained it beautifully, and I totally agree with the fact that sometimes it's really hard to have those challenging and difficult conversations, especially with upper management, with leadership. There's a way and a time to bring up those issues, and although I understand that racism and these conversations tend to have a political connotation to it, I believe that those are the political conversation that are allowed and welcomed in a workplace, especially when they are geared towards positive change. So a call to action and actually expressing or detailing what is a potential action to be taken is probably the best way to act as a member of an organization, as a younger member of an organization especially. So for example, ask to send out those anonymous surveys to give a voice to the company. Ask to respond to questions that would be probably difficult to be answered in a public way. They could be anonymous surveys. They could be actually really positively impressing your company. And another thing is, again, commissions and committees that are inclined towards equal pay and equal role cover for people of color, Black people, especially in upper management, in leadership. Just ask your organization in the way and the manner that you think it's okay to be asked that question. Ask why you don't see as many people of color in leadership. Those questions at this point in time are welcome, if especially because they promote positive change. And last thing is, calling out somebody's mistake or somebody's shortcomings is always hard, and I totally recognize that. There is a way that you can do that, talking to your mentor, talking to your immediate supervisor, and I can assure you that this brings positive change. I've done it personally, and it has been received in a really positive way. So don't be afraid to speak up, because it's not going to be a bad thing for you. It's going to be positive. You are going to show leadership just because you're able and willing to speak up.
Absolutely. I'll turn to the next question in the chat box, but I do want to remind everyone if you could mute your phones to make sure you're on mute so that we don't have any interference noise, and turn your cameras off as well. The next questions, I'm concerned that some people might take justice for a particular race too far, such that it causes negative impacts on others. What do panelists think of the recent news? A UCLA lecturer was placed on leave after students criticized his response to a request to postpone a final exam because of protests over the death of George Floyd. How do we as civil engineers on the academic field should act in order to provide equality for all races? And Yvette, I know you are an academic, so I think you're probably the best person to speak on this. I think you're on mute too, Yvette. I'm sorry. No, we can't hear you. Do you want to try that?
Tirsa,
Yep.
in the meantime, I can maybe add something.
Yep,
Since
definitely.
I was from academic, and Yvette can get into the phone. Is that okay? I
No,
would say
that works.
This is a very interesting question. And again, as we all understand, these type of conversations can be quite difficult. The interpretation that I have of the situation, again, I don't have firsthand knowledge, but for what I hear in published report, there are two elements there. And I think the person that asked that question also may have used some of the words that sometimes get interchanged, but it has different meanings. You know, the whole issue of equality versus equity. And if we look, equality is to give everybody the same. And when you start looking at equity, is to acknowledge the differences, the difference where they're coming from. I don't know how many of you have seen the cartoon in which you have three kids trying to look over a fence to watch a baseball game. Well, one is taller, one is medium sized, one is shorter. If you do equality and you give the same level of like the stool, the same size to all three, what happens is that the taller one can see better, but the medium one barely see what the short one cannot see at all. And if you're looking equity, what you want to achieve is that all three of them can watch the game. So you may have to give different size tools to each one of them so that they can have the same experience. So I think that that's one issue that we have to be careful, because equality and equity sometimes can be interchangeable, but they have very, very deep differences in the meaning in terms of the end result. In addition to that, I would say that in this situation in particular, I think the issue of empathy, understanding where people are coming from. You know, what I read in the report is that the professor was saying, what happened to the white people from Minnesota? Aren't they also suffering? I think there are different types of suffering. Maybe they are, affected, and they are affected in different ways for the events that happen there, and how they sometimes they may have been or they may be characterized. But I think that there is an issue here of understanding, and going back to my other statement about listening carefully. The student was asking is that, we wanted support, we wanted to participate and provide support to the and voice to the protest, and as such, I don't want it to have to select between lending my voice and finishing my work. Can you give us some time? And I think the professor here reacted a little bit different than what will have expected. That is, being understanding of the situation in a larger role. So it is true, it can be politicized, and it is politicized, but we have to really always look at this issue from an equity perspective, understanding where people are coming from and what they are going through. And I think in this case, we may have seen that those were not taken into consideration. And the issue of empathy are really related. And I think this it applies to any race, how you really empathize for what other people are going through. Okay? Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you. Now, Yvette is on the phone with us. I apologize to everyone for the technical difficulties today, but thank you for sticking through and being persistent. Yvette, I'll let you answer the question.
Yeah, no worries. And actually, I had not read about this incident, so I was going to answer more generally speaking to the question at hand. And Finiowski actually hit the nail on the head for what I was going to say. That is the focus on equity. And also, what I will add is I think one of the challenges is that it's pretty, a lot of times as engineers, and I won't narrow it down to civil engineers, I'll say as engineers or maybe STEM faculty more broadly, I think we miss sometimes the impact that social circumstances and emotional circumstances have on our technical performance. And so one thing is, and Finiowski talked about it in terms of empathy, but I think sometimes people are not, especially if people have not been in these situations, if you are not a person of color who has not been directly impacted by racism in some way, it may be difficult to understand the emotional toll that an event like this has on you. It's not easy to just keep on with business as usual. It's not easy to focus. When you are thinking about the very possibility that many of us think about every day, that our lives could be taken just for going about our day, that we could be, or someone we love could be falsely accused of a crime and be taken into police custody just because that we could have the police called us just because we don't look like we belong somewhere. If you have not lived that life, you don't understand how seeing someone murdered in broad daylight in front of witnesses with cameras on, how that impacts you emotionally, and then how that translates to your ability to perform on the technical side of things. So like I said, I haven't read about this particular case, but I would like for all of us in academia, and it's something that we're doing at our university, pulling aside and having the space to have the conversations that if people need to cry, if people need to reach out, we've been connecting people with our wellness centers on campus. Sometimes you got to shut down that research lab. Sometimes it may be that that test needs to be postponed or something to make sure that people are in the right headspace, in the right emotional space to be able to do their best work.
Absolutely. This next question in the chat is something that I think, Andrea, you've already talked about a little bit, but in light of recent events, our YMF chapter has talked about starting a diversity, equity, and inclusion committee. Do you have any advice for younger member groups that will be trying to incorporate this into their organization? Andrea, do you want to speak to that?
Yes, absolutely. I was actually lucky enough to be experiencing this both at an ACE level with my chapter at my company. So my organization, Berries, just established a new committee and a new position for a person of color, a Black person, that would be the diversity vice president. So at the ASA level, as I was just touching on that before, Los Angeles YMF also established an inclusion, belonging, and diversity chair. In order to bring those actions to completion, is actually important to start a conversation. So my advice to younger members would be just to provide examples of what you're doing in ASE and explaining all the results, all the positive change that you brought, and explaining the process and streamlining it as well to your organization in order for them to clearly understand what is the positive change that you brought just by incorporating a new chair in your volunteering free time. So bring those conversations and bring factual results to your organization in order for them to better understand. If your company, you don't believe that your company let's say, thrives in this equality, equity, and diversity culture, please start this movement in your company. It's never too late to change. It's never too late to learn, and it's never too late to actually incorporate those chapters and those commissions in your organization as well.
Absolutely. Quincy, I know are you still there? I thought Quincy might also have some great input on this question. Quincy? Maybe we've lost Quincy on the phone. I'll move on to the next question. I've had various experiences in enacting change in various companies. I find that I always need to frame the effort in terms of how it will financially benefit the company. I know there is a lot of research on diverse teams getting more done and coming up with more effective solutions. I struggle to parallel the research I've read about these online articles to the work we do as civil engineers. Our solutions are often dictated by specific criteria. How can I pitch the idea of spending time and money, either on a consultant or internal team members, on diversifying our team in a language that the company owners and decision makers will understand? We are a team of private consultants who design and build habitat restoration projects. Finioski, I feel like this is something that you could speak to.
Thank you, Tirsa. Again, very good question. And I can relate to what Kate is mentioning. Sometimes it's so difficult to bring this forward. And I think her strategy of ensuring that the conversation goes back to the kind of the vision, the mission, the strategy of the organization, and how the inclusion of diverse background will enhance that. I think that's something that is an incredibly good technique. The second part of the question is how will that really work on a civil engineering environment? And I can share with you that something that I was noticed in my role as a commissioner of the Department of Design and Construction here in New York City is that a lot of my colleagues had that same perception, like, okay, this issue of social justice or social impact is not anything that really has to do with us. You know, we are structural engineers. We design, the water mains. We design the streets. That doesn't really affect them. And we started having a conversation, and we start saying, okay, in which community do you actually, for which community do you design those elements, that infrastructure or those buildings? How does that, when you are in a construction, impact those communities? And we started looking at the notion of how you ensure to be a good neighbors. And in a city like New York, we are so diverse, like almost each neighborhood has a totally different ethos, different culture, the food, the colors, the storefront. And so we start talking about it. Okay, if you want to kind of provide a new, in these cases, where public buildings or public infrastructure that is welcoming to everyone, will you take a particular idea or thought that comes from other communities? In here, one of the discussion is like a Manhattan-centric perspective, that look and feel of what Manhattan is. Well, if you are in the Bronx, if you are in Brooklyn, if you are in Queens, and Staten Island, those are very different communities. So you really have to bring their participation, their community input to understand what they wanted, how they wanted, and also how you are respectful of their histories, of how they have evolved, how they have grown. And unless you have people in the team that can relate, again, going back to what Yvette says, understand, empathize to what those communities have, it's going to be difficult for you to provide a good design. Let me tell you, when I was in that role, I got the chance to visit so many different communities. And there were some buildings that actually we had done in the past that when I entered, I didn't feel welcome. It was like, it was done for somebody else different than me. And actually, I was the commissioner. But it feels like I will not feel comfortable in this space. But we also have to look at diversity from multiple dimensions, the diversity of abilities. Like, for example, sound. One of the things that we started saying is like people that have difficulty with hearing. We have to start introducing conductive cables so that they can actually be able to enjoy. people that do not speak English. How do you do the signage in a way that they can navigate a building easily? And without feeling that, this is only for English speaking person, not for other individuals that speak other language. So I would say that from Kate perspective, definitely the civil engineers have a major role to play on ensuring that your projects are really designed and built for the community and enhance that community. It's like a community capital. You are trying to enhance that community. Like in construction, one of the things that I noticed, we were very respectful of religious and spiritual celebrations of the major religion. But something that I noticed with our good neighborhood policy is that there are other spiritual and religious festivities or observation that we didn't account for. And we went in and we had in our schedule that we were going to shut up the water main. And I got a call from one of those groups and said, listen, this is the most important day for our community and you just shut down our water main. So I have to immediately ask the contractor to stop. Of course, there was a financial implication because they said you do the stop work order. But if we had members that were listening and understanding the community, we will have known which days are important to those communities and we will have a schedule around it. But we didn't. We shut up the water in the most important day for them because they were not from the major spiritual and religious denominations that we know of. So I think that's the notion that we have to look at how our work impact the communities that we build for and how we bring that perspective early on in our design, in our actions, so that we can incorporate it and be able to enhance the community capital.
Absolutely. I think you did a great job of answering that question. I'll move on to the next one in the chat box. And this probably is all that we have time for as far as the last question goes. I do want to be sensitive of all of our panelists' time. How can we increase the representation of people of color in the civil engineering profession? Here in Ohio, there are very few diverse candidates for jobs and low enrollment in engineering programs at universities. I've mentored young women of color in a local high school, and it already seems too late. How can we help people of color with better opportunities to join our profession? Bobby, I think you're back. Is that something that you want to speak to?
Can you hear me?
We can hear you now. I apologize, Bobby. We had some technical difficulties today.
Yeah, I understand. I wish I had opportunity to speak on some of the other topics, but the best way is to demonstrate the behavior yourself. I think some of you have already talked about being empathetic, doing unto others as you would have them do unto you. We have an ASCE code of ethics, and I suggest that you be guided by that code of ethics. We have been also dealing with this issue for a long time. I'm thinking way back into the early 70s. And it's not easy. It's hard work. So I would say just hang in there, be vocal, and be heard.
Absolutely. Yvette, do you have any advice about mentoring young women?
Yeah, I think certainly that's a big part of it. But there's a lot of research, and people have heard about the pipeline metaphor, and there's a lot of research that's been done to debunk that. One of the challenges that we have in having diverse populations, especially people of color in civil engineering, is that while granted our numbers are low in terms of enrollment and graduation, but the ones who do graduate end up leaving the profession. And a lot of it is because of the very thing that we're talking about today, is the systemic inequities and marginalization that occurs in the workplace. And so I think in order to fix the challenge of not having a diverse group of engineers, we have to first fix the systems. I think a lot of times our diversity efforts have focused on checking boxes to say we have a woman, we have a minority, we have an Asian or whatever. And so we've checked these boxes. So, hey, we're diverse. And we have not stepped back to say, how are we evaluating ourselves in terms of our practices. Are they equitable? As Finiowski very clearly demonstrated, there's a difference between equality and equity. So are our systems fair? Are they just? Are people being heard, valued, and respected? So are they not just at the table, but are they valued and respected? And the other piece is looking at the opportunities to advance within an organization. And so we have to look at that and not focus. Another thing that our quote unquote diversity efforts have long focused on in academia was, okay, we're going to bring in students from fill in the blank background, and it's treated as though all of the students from this background are going to come in with some type of deficit, and we've got to fix them so they'll fit our system. The truth is, no, we need to fix our system so our system works for everybody. And so I think we just need a paradigm shift in the way that we approach these types of efforts. And once we start to see the systemic change, then we will not be turning away people from the profession who have worked tirelessly and through some painstaking odds to overcome, to be able to attain civil engineering degrees in highly inequitable systems in a lot of cases, and then end up turned away from the profession because of the things that they encounter.
If it is okay, I would like to add to what Yvette says very eloquently in terms of the challenges and the opportunities. But I want to talk to the issue of the mentorship. And definitely, there are a lot of research, as Yvette mentioned, on the pipeline, kind of urban myth sometimes.
You just froze. Hopefully we'll come back. Up, there you are.
Okay. Sorry, I was going to say that from the perspective that high school seems to be a little bit late, there is a lot of research that actually confirms that middle school, early middle school is the best point in which you can start mentoring, because that's when the students make decisions in terms of the math and the sciences. Up to 5th grade, they don't really know, there is not that difference, but somehow in 6th grade, there are options in which math to take, which science to take, and then they start kind of screening themselves out. So I will encourage people that are in this call to really start looking at middle school, early middle school, 6th grade, to start a mentorship program, and also to really look at this mentorship as almost like a lifelong mentorship. These individuals will have questions at different times: what classes to take, what clubs to join, what high school to go, what applications to fill. And having somebody that have been with them during that time, it really provides that continuity. And I can tell you that the reward that you feel when somebody that you have started working with them in 6th grade, they are now joining the industry as a professional, is so rewarding. So I will encourage everybody to really look at the middle school, 6th grade, to start the mentoring process and really make a commitment that is almost like a lifelong commitment.
Absolutely. So we are cutting it close on time here. I do want to go ahead and ask you all to share some closing thoughts. Can you all take maybe 30 seconds or so to kind of, conclude? Obviously, we're not concluding the conversation, right? But at least for now, your closing remarks. Yvette, do you want to start off?
Yes, and I thank you for this opportunity. I just want to say I didn't get a chance to share a bit about what Mosaic is doing, but I want to encourage us that Mosaic is actively working to implement at the highest level of the organization, to be able to implement strategies that will help move ASCE towards being a more inclusive society, which we think in turn will help us to be a more inclusive profession.
Awesome. Thank you. Finiowski, do you want to go ahead and share some closing thoughts?
No, I think that I like your statement about continuing the conversation. This is not going to be fixed overnight. It has taken centuries to build up to the level that it is. It's going to take time, but we all should take active role to ensure that we are very conscious of our actions and inactions. And that sometimes what you don't do is as more impactful of what you do. So just take ownership of your own, of what you can do and what you shouldn't do.
Absolutely. Is Quincy still here? I want to try to give him an opportunity to wrap up. Quincy, are you on the line? Do you want to share some thoughts? All right, it doesn't appear that he is. Bobby, I'll turn to you next if you want to go ahead and close us out and share some of your last thoughts.
Okay, I will simply say that there's still much work to be done. When you go into office buildings, boardrooms, job sites, look around and ask yourself, is what I'm seeing reflective of what it ought to be? If it's not, then ask yourself, is there anything I can do to help change what I see? And then take action on it. I wish we had more time to have more discussion and good technology, but maybe at another time. Thank you for allowing me to join.
Thank you, Bobby. And Andrea, I'll turn to you next if you can share, 30 seconds or so, your last thoughts.
Absolutely. Well, again, thank you so much for including me in this very great conversation today. I want to just close with saying, to especially the younger members, I know it's easy to jump on the wagon of posting on social media, on attaching a hashtag, or placing a black screen on your profile. Just please consider also being not just an optical or a performative ally. I've been hearing about this a lot these days. Please try to do the things that are below the surface. Please try to do the things that nobody can see. I was just reading a message in the chat from someone saying, I'm planning on writing a letter to the founder and owner of my organization to issue a statement on Black Lives Matter on this issue. And please, I encourage everybody to do that, to do those things that are not visible and actually have a much greater impact. Thank you so much for allowing me to share today.
Absolutely. Thank you all for joining us. I greatly appreciate your time. I hope we can all continue this conversation in the future.